I genuinely believe these are the most important podcast episodes ever made. This is part 7 of a 14-part series as an investigation into the truth, but more importantly, a way of finding universal principles for a good human life. And today we're talking about the leap of faith. Now, unlike other episodes, I have a more structured thing because I already wrote these out, a bit like a poem in a way. And so I'll read through whatever I wrote down and then I'll discuss it, give some examples, and so on. So other ones were a bit more unstructured. This one has a bit more structure. As a man goes through his life, he is called to take a leap of faith, to leave much of himself and his life behind in order to build himself and his life anew. Man must be willing to change his entire life in an instant in order to align it with his deepest truth and new layer of purpose. Comfort is the killer of man. So right there to begin with, you basically need to understand that throughout your life you will be called to completely reinvent yourself, to completely change something about the way you live, the person you are, the things you do. And as a man, you must be willing to do that with no afterthought, without thinking, oh, but what about all of this stuff? A good example would be, imagine you're younger and you dedicate basically your entire life to building an aesthetic physique, right? You go to the gym religiously, you track your macros, you weigh your food and everything. But then a few years down the line, you realize, oh shit, my physique is pretty good now. And suddenly you think, well, that's great. And I've become more social, but I'm still broke. I have no money. And so then you realize that now, where before your layer of purpose was building your body, building your confidence, building yourself up as a person, you now need to build up your wealth, your finances. And so in an instant, you should be willing to go from religiously going to the gym and thinking about that all the time to putting the gym on a back burner. That doesn't mean you need to completely stop the gym. Sometimes you might have to, but most of the times you don't. But it would mean being willing to forego some gains because you're not tracking your calories anymore. You're not thinking about and improving your technique 24/7. You're not working out as much as you used to, which is going to mean you're not going to make as good progress as you were before, in the gym at least. Well, on the other hand, you'll make up for that by making progress in whatever you deem to be more important at the moment. Another example would be you make your way. It's like, for example, Bob Dylan, right? Very famous artist, won the Nobel Prize for Literature, never went to pick it up. He makes some good songs too. A lot of good songs. And at one point, I don't remember the year exactly, but Dylan basically goes electric. He used to make kind of country music, or at least music with like a regular guitar. And then from one day to the next, he goes electric. He starts using an electric guitar, which was a massive deal. A lot of people didn't like him for it. They thought, oh man, I like the old Bob Dylan, the one with the regular guitar, not the electric one. But that was a form of taking a leap of faith where, yes, it was unpopular. Maybe it made him less money. But just imagine what would have happened to Dylan if he hadn't gone electric. If he had just continued making the same old country songs, he definitely wouldn't have been the figure he is today. I think a lot of his best songs come after that point. So you need to be willing to reinvent yourself, even if that's not popular, even if a lot of people would call you crazy because they'll say, oh, you have something that's working, why are you changing it? If you don't feel it aligns with your deepest truth or purpose, that you might want to make music with electric guitars or that you want to completely change your career overnight, obviously don't do it like overnight, but if you think about it and you realize, man, this marketing job isn't for me, or this degree isn't for me, I actually want to go and live in a van and just think about life, read books and stuff like that. If you find yourself thinking about that for multiple times and you're like, man, I really don't think this is the life for me, then you would be a coward not to go out and do that. Now, you shouldn't mistake that with a sort of ADHD kind of mentality of just always needing new stimulation. You should obviously be able to stick with something even when it gets hard, but also be willing to completely change your life if that's what's required for you to get to the next step or the next evolution of yourself. This often requires a leap of faith. The leap of faith requires you to not be certain it will work out. Although leaps of faith happen a select few times in a lifetime, smaller versions of them happen on a daily basis. How do you deal with risks determines how much success you'll deal with. The men who take on risk are the only ones who are successful. So although yes, you have a lot of these big leaps of faith where you basically just need to go do something, for example, Dylan going electric, without being certain it's going to work out. These also happen on a day-to-day basis. If you see a girl you want to go over and talk to, that's a form of a leap of faith because you don't know if it's going to work out, but you need to be willing to take that risk if you ever want to, I guess, as obvious as it is to say it, if you ever want to get or have the potential of getting the success of that, which is getting a girlfriend, finding a wife, whatever. So these leaps of faith, you're going to have a few big ones in your life. For example, you could take Steve Jobs going back to Apple, or Elon Musk starting his next company. But you'll also have a lot of these scattered throughout your days and your weeks. That could be starting a new project, a new business, which you don't know if it's going to work out. I really want you to visualize the leap of faith. Like imagine a guy on one side of like on a cliff, and there's a massive gap and then another cliff. You're going to have big jumps, ones that are very far away and lead to a completely different sort of terrain. So for example, you go from jungle to forest, or you go from forest to desert. But you'll also have little cracks as you walk through your life that you're going to have to jump over if you want to keep going in the same direction, which is towards the life that you want. This does not only mean financial risks, this also means social risks, physical risks. You must learn to jump at the opportunity to take leaps of faith, build an addiction to doing what scares you. That is the only way to overcome fears. For what are fears but speed limiters on your life? What I like about this, and the reason I believe it to be a universal principle for a good human life, is that on top of leaps of faith being the only way to have a good life, it's also the only way to have an interesting life. It's the only way you'll feel proud of yourself when you look back, because leaps of faith require courage, and things that require courage are usually the things you're most proud of. So a good way to know what is a leap of faith is if it scares you. If doing something scares you, then it's probably your level. Because at the start, right, a little puddle that you have to jump over is going to seem like the biggest deal in the world, which it is for you. But for somebody who's used to jumping over puddles, it's not that big of a deal. But then the person who's used to jumping over puddles, taking leaps of faith that are pretty small, needs to start thinking about jumping over a bigger river with a strong current, or maybe jumping over a ravine, right, between two cliffs. You want to always be ramping up what you're doing. You want to do what scares you. You need to live at your edge, and don't fake it. Don't fake, oh, I'm actually really scared to jump over puddles, when you've done it a load of times and you're not particularly scared of it. And although you could combine this idea with the idea of stick or twist, which is throughout your life, you'll be presented with opportunities to either stick with what you're doing, which is getting you results, right? You stay in the same career, you're moving up in the hierarchy, the ladder, whatever, the corporate ladder, but you're always going to have a sort of joker kind of opportunity, a mystery card that you could choose to flip over. That's twisting, right? You either stick with what you're doing or you twist and go again, you roll the dice again. And these risks are what lead to the life most people can only dream of, but they are risky, and they don't only entail social risks, as I talked about, like people disagreeing with you or making fun of you or thinking you're crazy. They also come with financial risks, so investing in a new business, launching a new product, whatever it might be, and sometimes even physical risks to your body, to your physical health. And for those that don't know, stick or twist, I think is some kind of card game where you want to get to 21 exactly, and if you jump over it, then you need to start back at 0. And so most people go to you want to get the high score. I'm pretty sure it's something like that. And a lot of people get to 13, 14, and then they stop because you might get a car that's over 21 and then have to start at zero again. So the idea is, in life, you just want to keep twisting until, we all have different tolerances and different ambitions. But if you have big ambitions, that's going to mean you're going to have to twist a lot more than you would think. It's going to mean, if you want to be incredibly wealthy, well-known, and have a massive impact on the world, you can't expect to do that having a regular job. It's probably going to mean leaving your job, leaving uni, not going to uni at all, and instead focusing on what you want to focus on. And people are going to call you crazy, and it's not going to work out for a long time. But it's only through that continuous twisting of sorts that you will ever get to 21 and beyond. Some fears are justified, but most are not. Biological misfirings. Take the risks. The arrogant and audacious men utterly succeed and gain the respect of their peers. The opposite, cowards, will never be successful, let alone gain the respect of their fellow men. God did not make you to be a coward. So basically, you need to understand that most fears, most gut-wrenching feelings of, oh, what about all of this stuff? What if he says that? What if they don't like me? What if I lose all my money? What if I lose an arm? All of these, well, some might be justified, but a lot of these are just biological misfirings. That means your body and your brain were built for life in the savannah, for little tribes of 30 or so people, where your social reputation really mattered, and sticking out and failing could mean death. Whereas now, sticking out and failing means social welfare, and you get back on your feet, and your family is still there, hopefully, or if they're not, well, too bad. You can still make friends, you still have food, you still have shelter. It doesn't mean death anymore. And so a lot of these fears that keep us from living the life we want to live are, in fact, just misfirings of that brain and body that's trying to adapt to our modern world, but failing because it takes a long time. There is no such thing as a personal appetite for risk. Your so-called appetite for risk would be 10 times bigger if it weren't for the world wanting you to be a cross-legged bitch. Smart people are especially prone to being cowards, for they can clearly see the potential consequences of their actions. You must have zero fear of consequences. Act in almost oblivion to them. You will naturally safeguard yourself from doing really stupid things. In fact, you won't even want to do them. But for the things you want to do, but are afraid of the potential consequences, that's when you should deploy the zero fear of consequences. Zero fear of consequences is an idea I struggled with for a while, because I thought, well, why don't I just start shitting on the floor in front of everybody? I shouldn't be scared of the consequences, right? But then what I realized is that shitting on the floor in front of everybody isn't exactly what I want to do. And it doesn't really help me get to my goals. If it did, then I would, but it doesn't. If anything, it goes the other way. It stops me from getting to my goals for many, many reasons, the least of which being the time I take to do that is time I could be doing something else, but then obviously go to jail or a lot of other things. So basically, there is no such thing as appetite for risk. It's just how scared of you of the consequences. And when you realize that most consequences don't matter at all, your fear drops and suddenly you become courageous. If you realize that talking to a girl you see across the street and want to talk to, if you realize the worst thing that could happen is that she, either says no or screams at you, you realize you won't go to jail. Your family won't abandon you. It's just a girl. And most, 99.9% of the time, she won't scream. She'll just be a bit cold or something. Worst case. When you realize that, you realize there's nothing to be scared of. And if you realize there's nothing to be scared of, you're going to do it. And even if the consequences of some action you still think are pretty bad, maybe you lose all your money, you should learn to not be scared of that, because you only have one life at the end of the day. We don't even know where we are. I mean, I look around, there's a beautiful blue sky. I'm in some forest somewhere with trees around me and bugs and stuff. But we don't really know where we are. We don't know why we're here. We don't know anything. There is really no meaning to life other than to live it whilst you're here, right? We don't know why we're here, but we might as well do something whilst we are and pass on a legacy to help others do the same. And so when you realize that, for example, money is just a human construct, when you realize that being broke isn't actually that bad. There was this saying, you're so scared of going to zero until you do, and then you realize it's not that bad. I don't remember the exact saying or the quote, but it's something like that. It's very often, it's more of the people around you that make you think it's so bad. It's like, you don't think about, oh man, I'm worried about not being able to get food if I go broke. You're thinking about, oh man, what are all my classmates gonna think of me? Like my high school fucking classmates gonna think of me if they realize I'm homeless. That's what you think about. You don't really, you know you'll figure it out. You know you'll be able to get food. You know your family will support you. But you're just worried about all these things. And it's because society makes us scared of it. Because they tell you, oh, being homeless is so bad. You're going to die. People are going to hate you. They're going to spit on you. Being homeless is the worst thing ever. You don't consciously realize you have these thoughts or these beliefs. But society just instills it in you that being homeless, not working, is being lazy, and being lazy is bad because I don't know, because we need you to go to work, do your work, go back home, watch TV, consume, sleep less so that you can buy more, all of these things. Oh no, don't create. That's bad for you. Because if you create and it's weird, then people are going to make fun of you, and you wouldn't want that happening, would you? It's all these beliefs that society ingrains in you to push you to live a life you don't want to live, but that benefits whoever's at the top most of the time. And so when you realize that the consequences of living the life that you want to live, this is really what it's about. I mean, living a good human life is really just about living a life you want to live. And when you realize that the risk of trying to live a life you want is a bit of ostracism, is a bit less money, maybe. But the risk of living a life the way society wants you to, going to uni, getting a job, finding a girlfriend you don't even really like, but you found nobody else, or that you really, really love and hope she never leaves you. The risk of that is getting to 80 and looking back and thinking, man, what the fuck did I do with my life? I don't know about you, but the second one does not sound very appealing when you really think about it. When you really, really think about it, which is what they don't want you to do. They don't want you thinking. Why do you think all these social media platforms are free? To service you, to inform you of anything? No. You're not worth informing. You don't matter. It's just to stop you from thinking, to make money off of you, suck you dry, but not in a way that feels good. Zero fear of consequences, only as long as it aligns with your goal. And don't think, oh man, if I adopt this, then I'm going to start shitting on the floor. Because no, you don't want to shit on the floor, and it doesn't help you with your goals. Or if it does, then actually don't do that. That's just disgusting. People who live small and sheltered lives will call you reckless. Let them. They'll watch you as you rise beyond what they thought was possible. All being, quote, reckless. You must learn to not even fear death. When a man no longer fears death, he is unstoppable. I don't like the word unstoppable there, but people will call you reckless. This goes back to the social ostracism. This goes back to the facing whatever. Like people thinking you're weird and everything. They'll call you reckless. They'll think, oh, look at this guy. He doesn't even think about the consequences. He's crazy. Like what have you always been told? Oh, think of the consequences of your actions. You need to face the consequences of your actions, which is true. If you do something bad, we'll face the consequences of it. What does that lead to? The consequences. Think about the consequences. You always, you think about teachers. Who would they call crazy and reckless? The guy who doesn't think about the consequences. Oh, he just does what he wants and he doesn't even think about the consequences. We need to talk to his parents. Call the principal in. You've always been told, and now you might be realizing, holy shit, I didn't realize I had these beliefs, but they've been ingrained in you that the guy who doesn't think about the consequences is reckless. But the guy who doesn't think about the consequences is also the guy who lives a life he doesn't regret. Just think about it. All the teachers that told you to think about the consequences, would you want their life? No. Do you think they want their life? No. So why the fuck would you listen to them? So many people will call you reckless. You try a business or you go and ask a girl out, maybe not reckless, but reckless sometimes, crazy, strange, off the hook, autistic. So many of our fears of social rejection, of failure, and so on tether back to the fear of death. When you remove that fear, nothing can stop you. If you've ever been in the company of a person who does not fear consequences, you can't help but see your cowardice staring you in the face. After a good night's sleep, you wish you'd done what the guy had done, instead of staying watching on from the sidelines, especially for things where your life wasn't put at risk. So I have a story with this, is when I wrote this, I had this guy in mind who, we were at this trip, and like a school trip, and we weren't meant to leave past curfew, but the guy just went out on the roof and went socializing with the other classes. He went out of his room, up the stairs, like supposedly there were the supervisors or whatever, and went and had maybe not like a good time. I mean, he did have a good time. It's not anything crazy, but it's more of a story than what I did, which was just staying in the room and looking, oh, what is gonna happen? Are they gonna catch him? And oh, fuck. And then he came back, or no, he goes upstairs like to the other people's rooms from a different school. He looks down and he's like, hello. And I'm like, wow, he made it. Wow, that's crazy. He's crazy, man. And looking back, I think, man, what was I doing? I have no story to tell other than what he did. Whereas he could say, oh yeah, you know, when I, like to his kids, for example, he could say, yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I would sneak out of the rooms. That's so much more interesting. That's somebody you actually respect. And looking back, and even at the time, I realized, holy shit, not like at the time, but right after, I think, I thought I was so brave and courageous, but I was scared of getting caught. Like, what does that actually lead to? Your brain, if you don't think about the consequences, but if you don't really concretely say what your brain is thinking when it's like, oh, I shouldn't do that because, if you don't actually say it out loud, it is going to seem so much worse than it actually is. Because if I had gone out, what? I get caught and I just say, oh, I was going to get water. And then they're like, oh, okay, get water. And then I go back in my room. That was a slightly awkward interaction. Was the worst that could have happened. But instead I was thinking, oh, they're going to talk to me and then and then I'm going to get kicked out and then my life is going to be over. No, stop. Why are you worrying so much? A lot of fears, as I said with the biological misfirings, go back to a fear of death. Social rejection is just a fear of death. Physical, being scared of being physically injured is a fear of death, because being injured back then meant you couldn't walk around, hunt, you'd basically be useless to the tribe, which might mean they kick you out. Afraid of losing all your money or any financial risks, tether back to a fear of death. What if I'm on the streets and I get murdered, or I can't have food, or I don't have shelter and I freeze? All of these things tether back to a fear of death. And if you're able to remove that by just realizing that at one point you will die anyway, so you might as well do it early. It was Alex Honnold, the climber, said that most people call him reckless. There you go. But what they don't realize is that they're also gonna die. It's just they take these uncalculated risks of drinking and driving, whereas he's taking a calculated risk of climbing and doing something really cool with his life. He's gonna die. We're all gonna die anyway, so you might as well die doing something you care about. Don't think that just because you're able to avoid all risk means you will never die. That's not the case. Don't be stupid. Combine your fearlessness of death with the genuine pursuit of purpose. You mustn't want to die or even hope for it. You must simply not mind it, for you believe that if you do, it must be what's right, and you wouldn't regret anything. Staring death in the face, or rather the prospect that we may die at any moment, immensely helps you conquer your fear and take the leap of faith. You often regret the things you didn't do, and rarely regret the things you did do. That basically says it all. You remember the story I told you of the guy who sneaked out? He's gotten in trouble from other things, not from that. And I was wondering, man, why is that? He has so much potential, more potential than most people do, because he doesn't have this fear of consequences. But why is, his life is kind of shit. And I realized it's because, yes, he has zero fear of consequences. He doesn't fear death. If you asked him, he might say he does, but his actions, his not fearing social rejection and all this stuff shows that he doesn't really care. But he's missing the purpose part of it, because what purpose does is it allows you to concentrate all of that on one point. That means that not only do you have zero fear of actions, but you actually use that for something productive. If you only have purpose, but you fear consequences, I said fear of actions, I meant fear of consequences. If you have purpose, but fear consequences, then you're only ever going to dream. You're just going to think about, oh man, one day I'm going to be president, but then you would never actually run for any sort of office because you're scared of what your neighbors might think. If you only have zero fear of consequences, but you have no purpose, you're going to pull pranks, you're going to commit crime, you're going to do all these mischievous activities, which, yeah, might lead to an interesting life, but they don't lead to a meaningful life because you haven't actually done anything with your life. You've just done stuff, but not actually contributed in any meaningful way. If you have neither, that's most people. But if you have both, that's when you get an interesting and meaningful life, and that's when you're able to fulfill your purpose. If you have a purpose that's actually like worth being called a purpose, not just get a job and have kids. If you actually want to do like help 1 million men with something, or stop the environmental crisis, or make electric cars and send people to space. If you actually have a purpose with your life and you have zero fear of consequences, that's what's going to allow you to achieve that purpose. So you need both. You need the ability to take the leap of faith, but more importantly, or equally as important, is to have a place to go once you take that leap of faith, or have a direction to be going in which will require you to take those leaps of faith which you are willing and able to take. And this whole leap of faith thing doesn't mean you should jump out of planes without a parachute or swim with sharks with like a stake strapped to your back. You shouldn't want to die. You should just more of not mind it, because you realize that if you do die at some point, it was probably just meant to happen and you're okay with it. And finally, you often regret the things you didn't do way more than the things you did. Very rarely do you regret having asked someone out, or having started a business, or going to a new class or sports activity, and none of them worked out. You got rejected, your business failed, and you hated the sport. You rarely regret that. However, what you do often regret is not having asked someone out, not having started that business, not having tried out that sport, because you always wonder what could have been. What could have been if I'd tried that out? Because as humans, I guess we just have some kind of biological wiring that just makes it so that we think a lot more about the things we didn't do than about the things we did do. Because even if you do something and it turns out really badly, you'll just think, okay, well, life goes on. I'm glad I tried because it seemed like a good idea at the time. But if you see something that, well, yeah, it's basically this. It's just about being honest with your actions. If you think something is a good idea and you don't do it, you're going to regret it. If you know something is a bad idea and you do it, you're going to regret it. But if you, well, yeah, you get the point. And if you do something that you think is a good idea and you do it, you don't regret that. Even if it turns out to be a bad idea. It's basically just, I guess, about following your heart in a way, which is, yeah, as long as you follow your heart, you won't regret it. Even if your heart might lead you astray sometimes, it's the only thing that ever led you to the right place.